First off, thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to join today's InfoBurst webinar. We're going to be looking at everything we did in the year 2022. So this is our second annual year in review. Before I get started, I'd like to apologize ahead of time. Our family adopted a little 1-year-old border collie a couple weeks ago, and up until about 10 minutes ago, she has been picture perfect. And she's just decided that she's going to be an indoor barking dog. So it's just me and her. You might hear some barking in the background, and I really apologize for that. Not quite sure how to deal with that problem right now, but let's just see how we do. Maybe she'll work with us. Okay, so yep, I see everybody in there. So yep, let's get going. All right, so we're going to talk about all things. Everything we've done in 2020.2 in terms of features and enhancements. Before we do that, just to introduce myself, my name is Bryan Baca. Looking at the list, I know most, if not all of you. But for those that don't know me, I am the product support manager for InfoSol, and my primary area of focus is InfoBurst. I work on InfoBurst support, pre-sales, development, Q&A, wear a little bit of every hat. So chances are, if you've worked with the product, you worked with me or my colleague, Jeremy. My email address is there. If you need to get in touch with us, if you have any questions, comments, anything at all, feel free to reach out to me directly or just reach out to us on the help desk, and we're happy to get your questions answered. Okay, so let's talk about InfoBurst in year 2022. It was a big year. This was the second year since the InfoBurst platforms moved from 32-bit to 64-bit. And if you were present for the last year's year in review, you know that 2021 was big in terms of enhancements as well. Our move to the modern user interface plus the architecture change has kind of opened the floodgates for us to do a lot of the enhancements that we wanted to do over the years, and now we're able to do that. So you've seen a lot of development activity over the last 2 years. So just this year alone, and I did a count just before the webinar, approximately 50 new features and enhancements. We're not going to cover all of them today. I'm going to hit on some of the highlight features. I will then direct you into our release notes where you can see all the kind of the minor enhancements and features if you're interested. But again, as I said, lots of activity this year. The InfoSol help desk, that's all things InfoBurst. That's where you go, documentation, videos, forums, on and on. So the help desk is actually open to the public. So if you go to, we'll just switch over here, help.infosol.com, that will actually take you here. And you don't need an account to view our help desk, view our forums. You do need an account to do things like log tickets with us or download software. But if you're kind of looking at InfoBurst for the first time and you'd like more information, help.infosol.com. And we're talking today about the 4 versions of InfoBurst that were released in 2022. And so I'm going to direct you to our release notes forum, where whenever we release a version, we will release detailed notes about that version. What have we enhanced? What new features have we added? What bugs did we fix? How do I get updated? Things like this. So from the main help desk, just select forums. Then the first one you'll see is InfoBurst release notes. Click into that, and there you will see release notes for every version that we're about to discuss. And with each version, if I click into the 2022.4 version here, our current release, you will see, as I said, all those notes about enhancements, bug fixes. And then in each of these release notes, you will also find a link to the webinar where we introduced that particular version and then went into detail with all the features for that version. So we won't have time today to go into all those demos, but if you'd like to go view them, go to the respective release notes, watch the webinar, and we do demonstrate every feature that we've introduced in a particular version. So if you're looking to go more in depth, head over to the forums, check out the release notes. Okay, with that, let's start with the first release last year, which was 2022.1. We released that early that year. Typically, the first version of the year we're releasing in the February-March timeframe. Last year, timing just worked out that it was early in the month. So we released on January 6th. And this version introduced support for BI 4.3 SPO2, business objects. We also introduced support for, at that time, with the current Tableau server version 2021.4. We also introduced an option to send what are called delivery notifications to a Microsoft Teams or Slack channel. What this means, for those that don't know, is that when InfoBurst delivers content to a non-email destination, let's say SharePoint, for example, you can optionally, in your delivery, tell InfoBurst to send a notification of that delivery to somewhere. That somewhere could be an email recipient. That somewhere in this case could be a Microsoft Teams or Slack channel. So what happens is the job completes, the file gets delivered, and then in this case, the notification is sent into the defined Teams or Slack channel with whatever custom message you've included to describe the delivery. And you can even include a hyperlink to that file so that the user can see the message, click on the link, and go right into that file in SharePoint, or it could be a network folder, it could be FTP, things like that. So we've extended delivery notifications to include Teams and Slack, and that was in 2022.1. More in that same version, we introduced a new section of the monitor UI to cater specifically for events. Before 2022.1, when you looked at the schedule section of monitor, you saw everything. You saw all the time-based schedules, event-based schedules, and that proved to be a little confusing for users because events are independent of time. So you were looking at a list of schedules and their times, and then kind of sitting there orphan would be the events. So we decided, let's create a new section of monitor just for events, because we know those folks that use events, these events are important, right? Is the event set? How often is it checking? What is its status? And so now you can go in, and we can go take a quick look at that in the InfoBurst UI. So from the main user interface, you select monitor, and you'll see a new section here called events. So InfoBurst is going to list all of the active events. On the left-hand side, it's going to show you the next check time. So these are set at fairly high frequency. So we got a check coming up here in just in a few minutes. So if I click on the event, I can see all of its information on the right. What's its type? Where is it located? How often is it checking? I can see here at a glance, it's checking every 10 minutes. We can see that we're in a status of waiting, which means the event is not set. At the last check, the file was not there, so we're still waiting for the event to be set. We can even see down to the more granular detail, when was the first check today, when will the last check be, and things like this. So hopefully this gives you a lot more visibility into active events within your system, schedule events. We introduced a brand new InfoBurst macro called the query macro. I am not going to demonstrate this here. This one's a little bit involved. I would encourage you to go to the 2022.1 release notes, click on the webinar, and within that I provide a demonstration of this feature. In a nutshell, what this allows you to do is, if you have in InfoBurst a database connection and a query, and that query returns a bit of information, you can reference that query in a macro and use it in any field that is macro aware. So for example, if you're customizing a file name and you'd like to pull in a bit of information from a database with a query to insert into that dynamic file name, you can use the new query macro. I did forget to mention, as I'm talking, if you have any questions, any observations, please feel free to put them into, this always confuses me because we have a chat and we have a Q&A. So whichever one makes sense for you, put it in there. And at the end, I'll make sure I get all of your questions and comments addressed. So that's the query macro. 2022 saw lots of changes with regards to Microsoft authentication for SharePoint and Power BI platforms. So in the beginning of last year, we introduced support for what's called it's app-based authentication that uses a certificate with a private key. And a little bit later, I'll talk about where we are currently with SharePoint and Power BI authentication methods, which includes that certificate option. Hold on. She's being a really good girl. Very good. Okay. More 2022.1. Let me just skip through these. So InfoBurst integrates with a product called Squirrel. It's a HTML5 dashboarding tool application builder. Starting in 2022.1, we added integration features for those of you that leverage Squirrel. We added the ability to host your Squirrel dashboard in InfoBurst's built-in portal. We added the ability to deliver Squirrel dashboards offline, where the Squirrel dashboard leverages InfoBurst's data caching mechanism called XDC. If that's the dashboard's data source, we can actually deliver that dashboard interactive with data in an offline mode. And then finally, the ability to publish a Squirrel dashboard into a PowerPoint slide. Again, lots of functionality there, more than we have time to show today. But again, that webinar for 2022.1 will actually show you hands-on, for those of you that are Squirrel users, how all those features work so that you can take advantage of them. Okay, move on to the next version in 2022. 2022.2 was released April 28. The first big feature in 2022.2 was the new, what we call a calendar. I call it a calendar template. And this gives the user or the administrator the ability to create a custom calendar and then leverage that calendar when creating schedules. So up until that point, we have lots of scheduling options, but you had to define those options manually. Now, if you have let's say a specific business calendar you must adhere to, you can build that calendar, and then users can use that template when they build their schedules. This is pretty straightforward. If we go over to the InfoBurst UI, we'll just come over here, and we just say new calendar. We'll give this a name. Let's just call this webinar calendar. Give it a description if we want. And then it's just about selecting dates, right? So we come over here and just select some dates just for show. That's just fine. So whatever our calendar is, we hit save. Then when we say new schedule, let's call this webinar schedule. Let's add something first. I'll just throw in any old bursts like that. Then on the frequency tab, you're going to see a new option that says use calendar dates. From there, you go out and select the calendar, the one you just created. So there's our webinar calendar. And that's it. We do hope that that's going to make schedule creation easier, make it easier to make schedules compliant with your organization's calendars. So we have seen a lot of uptake of this feature. It just streamlines the schedule creation process. So that's the new calendar feature. Okay, let's come over here. For those of you that use workflows, and just a reminder, workflows are a task-specific interface in InfoBurst that's catered for a specific outcome. So for example, I want to publish a query as a Tableau hyperfile, or I want to publish a Webby report as a Power BI data set, right? It limits the features and functions to just that outcome. Workflows first came on, or first hit the product in 2021, and we have started expanding those over time as users have asked for new workflows. So in 2022.2, we introduced a Webby publishing workflow. So say I want to take a Webby report, publish it as PDF to email, something like that. Or the second one is a database query. That one is specific for our XDC users that says, okay, I have a specific task, which is take a database query and from it create a cache. And so it can only do that thing, but it's a more user-friendly interface. It's a guided process, step 1, step 2, step 3. So we just enhanced our workflows with Webby and XDC. Okay, more in that version. We started to see more and more requests and requirements around SharePoint lists. SharePoint lists, for those of you that aren't aware, you can think of it as just a data table that you can build in SharePoint and use for various purposes. It can be populated manually in SharePoint. You can import Excel files, and then you have your SharePoint list. And you can see a picture of one here. It's just tables or columns and rows, right? And we've had growing requests to leverage SharePoint lists for various tasks in InfoBurst. So as you can see there, we can, starting in 2022.2, use a SharePoint list, that data table, as a source, what we call a data source, for all sorts of things. We can pull in values to drive report parameters. We can pull in values to deliver the contents of the data set as a Power BI data set or a hyperfile, right? Or we can publish the contents of that file, as you can see there, to Excel or HTML. So giving users access into that SharePoint list and let them do InfoBurst things with it, data source or publishing. When users are publishing as HTML, and specifically it is output from a database query or output from a SharePoint list into HTML, InfoBurst before this gave you a standard a CSS style sheet for that HTML look and feel. You could modify the CSS, but you could only modify it once and it applied to every HTML you produce. So there was no way to customize per output. Starting in this version, we enhanced what's called the InfoBurst note, which is literally just a note object. You can go in and say, hello world or whatever you want your note to say. But there's a new classification of note that is CSS. So within that, you can actually go in and define how you want that HTML style sheet to look, colors and fonts and that sort of thing. So just expanding on the ability to customize HTML output from these various sources. Okay, oh, there's more in 2022.2. Right, this kind of forgot about this one. So in 2021, we first introduced support for Power BI. So the first stage of our support was the ability to take data from a source. That source could be a Webby report, a business object universe, a database query, Excel file. And InfoBurst would extract the data and push it into Power BI as a data set. So that's what came late in 2021. Then in the second quarter of 2022, we expanded that support to include bursting, publishing, and delivery of Power BI reports and paginated reports. So if you're a standard InfoBurst user, meaning you use it to burst your business objects reports, your Tableau reports, this is just an extension of that to the Power BI platform. And we are seeing more and more of our users, they have Power BI and they'd like to publish and deliver reports from that source as you would from, let's say, Tableau or business objects. We also see a lot of customers that are kind of either moving towards Power BI or have coexistence where they have needs to do this kind of custom publishing and delivery that InfoBurst does. So let me just show you a quick demo of that. I think that's worth looking at. So let's go up here. Okay, we're not going to go all the way through this. I kind of pre-built some things, but I think you'll get the concept. So I have previously gone out and created a platform connection to Power BI. If you're coming to this for the first time, just know that Microsoft's modern authentication methods are a little more stringent than what we're used to with, say, connecting to business objects or Tableau, which is a good thing. So they have several authentication methods that do require a bit of setup, and we have documentation for that, and we're happy to assist. Once you're connected, then you can go about pulling Power BI reports into InfoBurst just like you would a Webby report or a Tableau workbook. So here, for example, I can go out to my Power BI platform and I can, here are my Power BI workspaces. They're represented as folders here. And then I can go in and browse all the various objects, reports, and we'll talk about data source or data sets in a moment. So I bring in my Power BI reports. And in this example, I've pulled in a Power BI report, which for those that aren't aware is more like a dashboard, right? Sales by region. But here I also have the other report type was a Power BI paginated report. So we can work with both data type or both report types. We can burst both report types. With sales, or excuse me, with Power BI reports, there's no concept of parameters, so we burst by filtering. So we come in and we define a filter. In this case, I'm filtering on region. Again, all the same InfoBurst concepts as you're aware of. So I have a filter. I need to supply a list of values. That's where our data sources come in. We can go out and get those values from a query. Excel, as you just saw, we can get them from a SharePoint list, right? So all that same flexibility. So the bursting of the Power BI report, breaking it up and personalizing the data, and then the delivery, all the destinations you know, and actually some of those are new if you haven't attended the previous webinars, but network folders, email recipients, SharePoint, cloud drives, FTP, all of these are potential destinations for your Power BI reports. Format-wise, there is a difference between a Power BI report and a paginated report. So these formats are dictated by what Microsoft provides through their SDKs. So for the Power BI report, you can see there we have the PDF, PNG, and PowerPoint formats. And if we're working with a report, a Power BI report has what are called pages. If you're familiar with Webby, you can think of it as the equivalent of a report tab, or if you use Tableau, you can think of it the equivalent as I think they call it a worksheet or a view, right? So just like Webby, for example, so this Power BI report has 3 different pages with different content on them, and I can either deliver those that Power BI report as is with all 3 pages, or I can pick and choose what I want to send, right? So you can customize what gets sent out from this particular report in terms of pages. And then with paginated reports, that's the little black P icon there. Paginated reports do have parameters. This is super simple. I've just put in a couple of delimited values, but again, I could drive this region parameter with any of our data sources. We can customize or burst the report on the parameter. And then with the paginated report formats, we do have a more extensive list. Microsoft has a better set of formats for paginated, which includes things like HTML, Excel, and CSV, right? I'm just going to address this question as I saw it come in, and we're on the Power BI pop-up. Keith asked, does InfoBurst support on-premise Power BI report server? No, what you see here is all Office 365 Power BI. Oh, okay. Okay, all right, let's move on from there then. So that's Power BI report publishing. And we gave an actual demonstration of this in the 2022.2 webinar. Within a burst, which is the unit of execution in InfoBurst. So the burst is the thing that we run, and it has your Webby report or your Tableau workbook or your Power BI report or whatever you're running. There are options within the burst to dictate what happens if the burst fails or aborts, right? You can say, okay, just stop, don't do anything else, or if you're delivering content, you have the ability to deliver partial content. There's all sorts of features in there that say, if failure, then do this. We added a new option in this version for what we call an intelligent retry. I'm just going to show you where it is. This is definitely a feature that if it rings a bell for you, if you have an interest, you should definitely go into the help desk. There will be an article called Burst Options. And within that, we describe all the features that you see in this UI. And one of them is abort behavior. And the option itself is briefly described here. You can see the tooltip on the right. But there's a lot more to this, and we don't have time to get into all of it today. But basically what this means is that InfoBurst now has the ability to, in the event of a failure of a burst, let's say we're bursting up, well, let's just say we're bursting a Power BI report, right? Let's say we're bursting by region, and maybe we're bursting for 50 regions, let's say. And imagine a scenario where InfoBurst is submitting refresh requests to Power BI. Let's say we get through 25 regions on the list, and all of a sudden there's a problem in Power BI, and we hit it. That's an abort. It's a failure, right? What this retry says is, in the event of that failure with the option enabled, retry the burst, meaning rerun the Power BI report, but only for the values that didn't run the first time, because we have already run for the first 25 in the list, right? So it's intelligent in that way that we're not going to go back and have to rerun work we've just run. So it will try again, only for the values that were missed. Hopefully the issue's resolved itself, and then the full burst will complete, and then all the content that was produced before the retry and after will be sent out. That's the feature in a nutshell. Like I said, there's descriptions in the help desk that help you understand what this feature does, how to use it. But we have seen, we've seen users, we've seen improvement in users' environments that leverage this almost instantly, because so much of the time when we're dealing with reporting platforms, right? And those of you that have problems, you understand, maybe chronic resource issues in BusinessObjects or connectivity to Tableau. This really helps, because if the issues are intermittent, then waiting and retrying will often overcome, and then it just works, right? It hits an issue, it retries, and you never know there was a problem. So that's the continuous retry option in the burst. Okay, let's move on to the third version, 2022.3. That came out August 25th. This one is, I need to find a better word than edge. This is bit edge, but for the users that leverage this, it's really important, okay? So there are InfoBurst users that leverage actions to augment their bursts and schedules. So let me give you an example. Let's just say I have a critical burst that runs every day, and I want to be able to write status out into a table. Maybe the application's being monitored, by an external application, for example. So the example I'm thinking of is, they will, they want to know in this database table when InfoBurst starts its job. So what they've done is engineered an action, and there are many types of actions. One of them is a database query action, which basically says, go run a query when status of burst is start. So you put the action on the start status, and when the burst starts, executes the action, runs the query, that does its job, then the burst runs and does whatever it does. And they will often have an at-end action as well that says, okay, we want to know exactly when it started, so go run a query to write that to a database table. We want to know when it completes, go write that status, or maybe when it aborts, right? So you've got actions occurring on both ends of the burst or schedule, which has been in the product forever. But we got feedback from users that said, okay, well, if, let's say, for example, InfoBurst goes to run the on start action and there's a problem with the database, right? Who knows? What they're saying is that job shouldn't run if the action itself failed. So think of this as, the ability to influence the status of the burst based on the status of the action. So if the on start action fails, the burst won't run. It'll be put into an abort status, and then anything you've set up on abort will do its job. And at the end, let's just say the first action runs, the burst runs to completion, but then the end action fails. They're saying that should also influence the status of the burst. So even though the start action was successful, the burst was successful, if the on complete action failed for, let's say, a database issue, InfoBurst will go back and flag that burst as aborted so that someone knows to take action and look in to the problem. So this is, it's a feature of the actions when you create an action. Sorry about that, my headset shut off. So basically, when you create your action, you're going to see this new critical opt-in. In there, there's a tooltip that explains what I just told you about how to leverage this new feature. But it's just extending the ability to leverage actions in the product. For those of you that use delivery conditions, delivery condition is a way to determine if content is delivered based on conditions within the report data. So as you can see in the screenshot there, we've said, okay, this delivery has a condition based on a variable called sales. I'm not going to get into how that's set up right now. That's a conversation in itself. But basically, you define where InfoBurst should look in the data for a value for sales, and you could define a value, and then the condition would look at that value when you run the job, and if that value didn't meet the condition, then InfoBurst won't send the content. So this is commonly used to suppress delivery of empty reports. Several users had shared their idea, which was a great one, about the ability to leverage InfoBurst macros for that condition value. So instead of putting in a static value, you can leverage a macro. In this case, I'm using a date macro. So if this was probably in equals to, right? So if this, oh no, it is equals to that date. So basically, when this job runs, if that field does not contain that value, content won't get delivered. So this should add even more flexibility to the delivery condition feature. There were also in this version several changes or enhancements to the InfoBurst portal. Again, I see names I don't recognize, so I'll try to explain what these things are. I know a lot of you probably know what most of these terms and features are, but InfoBurst includes its own content hosting portals. It's just part of the product. It's not an add-on. And it is used by people that use the portal as a destination for their business objects report, or excuse me, business intelligence report content. It could be business objects reports, Tableau reports, Power BI reports, dashboards, right? So it's just kind of a simple portal that our users can leverage to host content for their users, their report consumers. And so we've seen more adoption of the portal in the last few years, and with that has come some really good suggestions for enhancements, and that includes the ability to filter the content. Actually, I'll just show you, for example. Let's go over here, go into the portal. And so here, for those that don't know, well, this is the InfoBurst portal, but it's not files and folders. The portal is arranged by what we call content groups. And we call them content groups because each content group can contain or will contain multiple versions of the same file if you're delivering it over time. So here, for example, is my sales by region report. It's getting bursted by region. And as you can see, I've got versions going back, I think, 30 days, right? So that's why it's called a group, because it's not just one file in a folder, it's multiple versions of that content in what we call the content group. And as you can see there, I've got different versions based on region, and we've added the ability to filter the visible versions based on that bursting value. So let's just say I want to see Mideast and North Africa, apply that. So just a basic filter to allow you to narrow that list down based on certain criteria. If we go back, okay, I will address that in just a moment, Kirk. Since we're here, let me do this. Yeah, let's go back here. So the other feature, or two features, were, I have to remind myself, file upload. So our portal was designed to host content that InfoBurst produces, right? It's not just a catch-all portal, but we've heard some pretty compelling cases to allow our portal to host files that our product didn't produce. So 2022.3 gives the administrator the ability to, and I happen to be an admin in the portal, upload files. So we can upload everything you see there: Excel, PDF, text, CSV, PNG, HTML, and a dash file, which is a squirrel dashboard. So you can now upload files to the portal if you like. And this is just an admin function, the ability to rename subfolders. This is not something you could do in earlier versions of the product. User Kirk asks, is there a role, meaning an InfoBurst user role, that both allows portal access and workflow access? The answer is no. The role that allows portal access, well, actually, I'm sorry, Kirk, that's not true. If you, I think yes, if you were to create a role, let's say a team member, and give them access to create workflows, then inherently that user will have access to the portal. So yes, yep. Had to think about that one for a second. Okay, let's see. Next feature, create SharePoint list from database and query. So we talked earlier in the presentation about SharePoint list support, the ability to publish a SharePoint list in a format like Excel, or use a SharePoint list as a data source for, let's say, bursting or email deliveries. And this version extended that support to the ability to create a new SharePoint list from an InfoBurst data source, like a database, query, or Excel. So let me show you what that looks like. If we go back over here, I'm going to go back over to my webinar folder, and let's just say, what are we going to do here? New burst. Okay, let's just call this SharePoint list from query. We'll use a database query in this example, so I'll save that. So here we want to take data from a database using a query. It could be a view or a stored procedure, and then InfoBurst will programmatically create a SharePoint list up on your SharePoint portal. So here, if I go over to my data sources, I'll just select my sales records database connection. I have a query here that returns some sales records. I'll select that. And then here in the delivery, if we go over to the format and select format SharePoint list, we automatically have selected as the destination SharePoint. And then if we have more than one SharePoint platform, we can select it, right? We can name that SharePoint list with a custom name if we like. All the basic delivery features apply. And then the result of that, I ran this ahead of time here in this tab, is a SharePoint. Here I'm in our InfoSol SharePoint portal, and there is a SharePoint list that was created from a database query in InfoBurst. So that's something that we're seeing adopted as well. Okay, we're getting a little short on time. Discover. This was probably, I'd say, with Power BI report publishing was probably the biggest feature of 2022.2. This was the second biggest. And this is a reporting feature called Discover. So this is built-in system reporting in the InfoBurst UI for not just administrators, but users as well. Prior to this, there were other methods for reporting. They were kind of stitched together, OData, static reports from our UI. So this kind of brings all that together into the main user interface. And this is being actively developed, right? We are adding reports based on user input. We have a lot of folks that are leveraging Discover now. So there were two phases so far of Discover. In the first phase, which was in 2022.3, was the ability to create these reports, customize them, and then export them to Excel, right? So let me just show you how that works quickly. I'm running short on time here. So here in System, I have a new option called Discover. And if I come down here to, let's say, System, these are all canned system reports, reports that give you documents from a platform, documents not used in a burst, burst not run. You can see the entire list there. So these are all the different types of reports that our users have have requested over the years, and we're adding new ones as we get feedback. Let's look at a common one here. So I want to know, I want a report that shows me all bursts aborted between 2 dates. So here, for example, I might say, let's go back to January 1 to the current date. We'll run that. And so we can see the report there on the screen. And I'm not displaying this, but let's go like this. Here we go. Right, so all the information about those particular bursts, their status, when it ran, where they located. These reports in the UI are interactive, so I can come in and say, sort various columns. Wherever you see a hyperlink, that means that you can interact with the report. So what we're saying here is that this burst aborted today at 9:30, and we can see that it's a burst, and there's a link, that's the burst ID, and the hyperlink means we can open the burst from the report. So imagine a scenario where I see something failed and I want to go look at the burst configuration to see if maybe we got it wrong. I can actually click the burst and open it directly from the report. So you don't have to identify the object and then go find it in the managed system. You can open it directly from the report in the user interface. So wherever you see a hyperlink here, I can open the burst. Here we can see this burst is associated with a schedule. I can open that schedule from the report as well. So there is an element of interactivity there. If I come over here, for example, and say, let's run the group report. Here, for example, where there's more interactivity. So here I can drill into that user with the hyperlink, this 912, that his name is ACL group. This was just a test I was running. But then here we can see, I'm sorry, this was the group, but here when we see the accordion, the little arrows here, we can actually expand this and see what users are in the group, right? So these are interactive based on what you're looking at. I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to say I'm going to run this report again, and we need to talk about customization. So let's run it. So from here, I run my report. Okay, that's what I want. I can do things like omit columns. So let's just say when I publish this as Excel, I don't want the burst ID. I don't need to see the elapsed time, and maybe I don't need to see the user ID. So I can pick and choose what columns I want. Then if necessary, you can actually reorder the columns in the report. So let's just say I want burst status to be right up top. That's my first column. So I say, okay, now we get the format changed based on the selections. And from there, we have this little Excel button. That means I can take the format that or the report I've just created and publish it as Excel. So that was published off, saved to my desktop, and there's the report I just generated, customized with the columns and column order I just defined. You see buttons on the screen I haven't talked about. We're going to get to that in just a moment. There are report types for system information. There are reports that you can run based on specific object types. So all sorts of reports in here. And like I said, we go deep dive into this in the 2022.3 webinar if you want to go back and view that. All right, let's come over here. Okay, 2022.4, that was the last version last year. It is our current general release version. It was released on December 5th. Two big changes in 2022.4. We introduced support for 4 cloud drives: Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, and Box. So support is two-way. We can deliver files to these cloud drives, and we can read from these cloud drives. So I could take my Power BI report, publish it as a PDF, and send it to Dropbox, for example. But we can also read from them, right? So if let's say I have an Excel file that I would like to use as a data source in InfoBurst, and I want to use that Excel file to drive bursting values or email addresses or whatever, you can create a file list that points to that Excel file on a cloud drive, and then use that cloud drive Excel to drive your report bursting, right? So that came in 2022.4, and I think I just covered that. So let's skip over that. Okay, so like I said, phase 1 of Discover came in 2022.3, and then we enhanced the feature in 2022.4. So we added the ability to save custom schedules or custom reports and actually schedule and deliver them. So let's come over here. let's do this again. Let's just go back to our bursts aborted between. That's a good one. So let me go back and change that to first. Let's run it and just remind ourselves what we have here. So again, I want to do some customizations. Again, don't give me schedule ID, don't give me that. Doesn't matter, we'll just select a few things there. And maybe again, I want to change the order of the columns. That's good. So there's my customized report. Now I can save that customized report. It gives it a default name and description. You can do whatever you want with that. When we click OK, now there's a new My Reports section. So any report that you've customized and saved, you as your InfoBurst user account will see your report. And there it is. And now I can go on and schedule that. So let's say practically I'm an InfoBurst admin and I want to report, let's say on the first day of every month that shows me all the aborted bursts in the previous month. That would be a good example. So here we have the schedule button. So we're going to add this to a schedule, and let's just say we want this on the first of every month. So for that, I'm actually going to leverage an InfoBurst date macro. So let's just say I want, what do we have here? It's probably up here. Here we go, first day in month. That's when I want to schedule this report to be delivered to me. So I'm going to apply that. Okay, that's when the report will run. But then we have parameters, which are the begin and end dates. So we need to define those. So if this is going to run on the first day of the month, I want today, but I want today minus 1 month. So for those that don't know, we have these date macros. With these date macros, we can apply math. And if we come into the macro builder here, there are descriptions of how you can actually customize these macros. Select a macro, it gives you all the examples there at the bottom. But basically what I want to do here is say, when this report runs in the first of the month, the parameters should be today minus 1M, which means 1 month. Oh, no, 1 month up to today. So that's going to give me my monthly aborted burst report on the first of each month. So I save that off. So 2022.4, I can save my customized reports and I can schedule them for regular delivery. All right, let me just, okay, actually, I'll come back to those questions because I want to make sure we get through all this. Again, this is another cool feature that was user inspired. Actually, several users inspired this. And basically, right, if you use InfoBurst to deliver content via email, most of you do, you know that you can drive this process with a data source, meaning, let's say I'm going to burst my Tableau workbook. I'm going to burst it by region. I'm going to supply region values from a query, let's say, and in that same database table, I have the list of email recipients. So region 1 goes to user 1, region 2 to user 2, and so forth. And what we found were users that were leveraging this feature to send what we call data-driven emails, where the recipient address is custom, the subject line is custom, the message is custom. These are all things you can do with deliveries today, but they were playing little tricks to not deliver the content. I don't want to actually deliver a Tableau report to a user, so they played little tricks with their delivery, and then they just used that function of InfoBurst to do basically like in bulk emailing from a data source. So we saw this being done in the field, and so we've added a new object called a memo, which basically allows you to create emails from a source, right? So you create a database table that's got all the stuff you want, recipients, their custom subject line, the custom message, anything you want to put in that message that's custom, and then you schedule this thing. And then InfoBurst is actually the source of these customized emails where there's no content delivery involved. It's pure emailing driven by a data source. Lots more information in the help desk about that. 2022.4 webinar has a hands-on demo of that as well, if you'd like to see that. Extending our support for Power BI in 2022.4, we introduced the ability to schedule a native Power BI data set. Before, we talked about InfoBurst's ability to create and deliver a data set to Power BI from one of our various data sources. But we've had users come to us and say, the scheduling mechanism in Power BI is very rudimentary. Basically, schedule on this day at this time. There's not much you can do with it. And they know that as users of InfoBurst, they have access to a very advanced scheduler, and they wanted to leverage those features when scheduling the refresh of their native data sets, meaning a data set that InfoBurst didn't create, right? So now in InfoBurst, you can go in, and if you're a Power BI user, simply, I come back up here to my webinar folder, I can go into, I'm going to say new document. I'll go to my Power BI platform. And if I come in here, my test workspace, I have a data set. It's the little orange icon, the DS there, data set called Aviation 72. I select that, I can add it to InfoBurst. Then I can add that data set to a burst, right? Just like we would a Webby report, and then go on and schedule it. So now we can leverage InfoBurst. Let's say I want to run that. I want to run that data set based on an event in InfoBurst. So maybe like a database query. So I can come in here and say event. I've got one that's based on a query, and boom. Now we have a Power BI data set that is being refreshed based on an InfoBurst event. And then InfoBurst will, on that schedule, call into Power BI and say, go refresh the data set. InfoBurst can report back status, so you can know if the data set refresh was successful or failed. And then from there, you can do things like send out email notifications and all that good InfoBurst stuff. We're just extending that to scheduling native Power BI data sets. Okay, there's one more. And then the major change regarding authentication to things like Power BI and SharePoint is the addition of OAuth, what's called delegated authentication for Microsoft. This is kind of the go-to modern authentication method that Microsoft promotes, in addition to the app-only methods that we supported previously. So if you use Power BI, we have documentation that tells you how to achieve OAuth. Same for SharePoint. And I would just use this opportunity to say to those of you that use SharePoint, if you use a SharePoint platform and you're using what's called basic authentication, which means users supply a SharePoint username and password, you should be exploring these authentication options today, because Microsoft has been in a rolling fashion turning off basic authentication for the last 1.5 years. And at some point, it will stop working for you. So please, if you think you're affected, reach out to us on the help desk. We're happy to provide you guidance, get you going with one of these new authentication types, which are more secure, they're more modern, and so we can help you out with that. Okay, the questions have been coming in, so let me just go back and look. I don't think there's much here. Okay, from Valerie, for the portal, are there individual file size limits or an overall data limit? No. Those files, the portal files, are actually stored on disk on the InfoBurst server. So really the only consideration, if you plan to store, an excessive amount of files, and I'm talking about, today, who doesn't have a server that has, tens of gigabytes of free space? You just need to kind of look at what you intend to generate and store and compare that to the disk size on the InfoBurst server and size your server accordingly. But no limits in InfoBurst to that, Valerie. Let's see, Dawn asks, how much history for Discover? The history is going to be dictated by how you have InfoBurst configured. So if I come over here and just quickly show you, so in terms of retention, like log retention and activity retention, if we come into system as an administrator, and let's just go into right there. So system configuration, you select this log retention option, and those are all the different log files that that Discover is reading from. And you can see all the defaults there. So for example, the burst activity log, which is kind of the key log, we store that for a default 30 days, but you can change that to whatever you like. So all of these are configurable. So you can basically, Don, you can come in and dictate the history for Discover reports. Okay, the other ones are just comments. We'll go past those. As I'm finishing up, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in real quick. We're getting right up to the end of the hour, and I want to respect everyone's time. So let's just go ahead and look at the other slides. Okay, so next webinar, InfoBurst 2023.1 overview. We're already there. We're in active beta, and actually we're going to be releasing 2023.1 as a Valentine's gift. We're going to put that on February 14th. The general release day is the 14th, and the release webinar will be on the 14th as well. That should already be up on events.infosol.com. If you attend these webinars and you've already registered, you don't have to do anything. You're just going to get an email saying, hey, new webinar coming up, go register. If you aren't registered, just head over and put your information in. As you know, these webinars are free. We do them as often as we can. And we'll go deep dive into the new version on Tuesday, February 14th. Lots coming in the new version. Just a few highlights. I know a lot of you are in the process of moving to BI 4.3 and specifically BI 4.3 SP03. And we will be introducing official support for that service pack of 4.3 in 2023.1. We are seeing lots of users coming in with Power BI paginated report requirements. And with that, we've identified some things that we could do to enhance the way that we handle Power BI paginated report parameters. So there are several changes there as well that we'll talk about. For administrators, kind of the last mile, one of the last things you ever had to get onto our server to do, the InfoBurst server, was to manage licenses. We have now put license management into the UI. So now restarting services, managing licenses, managing repositories, all of that can be done from the UI. No reason to log on to the server. So we'll show that off as well. And like I said, register at events.infosol.com if you haven't already. Webinar recording, we should have this up later today, no later than this time tomorrow. And John will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the website will send you out a notification when that recording is ready for you if you'd like to share that with others. And as always, stay informed. Help desk is there. Follow the announcements forum. That's the way you know that new versions of the software come out. Try to stay as current as you can with releases. Get all those new bug fixes and features. LinkedIn, there's a group there. Just search InfoBurst. Happy to have you as part of that group. And that's all we've got. Let me just take a quick look. Sajid, okay, there's one more question there. Okay, yep, yeah, Don asked that question. We're happy to go into detail with that. I'm seeing thank yous there. No, thank you to all of you. We always appreciate your time with this. Every time we have a webinar, we see more users. The InfoBurst community is growing, and that's great to see. And we look forward to seeing you on February 14th. So with that, thank you and have a great day.